Hello. So this presentation is going to be about cyber warfare between the United States and Russia, which will be mainly focused on their attacks on civilian infrastructure. This presentation will not be about a single attack, but of a series of attacks that took place between the years 2013 and 2016. This presentation is part of the ICW Information Cyber Warfare coursework at SLIIT, and it is presented to you by TRN Narpiris and KVA Sachinta. So to start, what is cyber warfare? Cyber warfare is the use of digital attacks such as malwares and viruses, and even persons, espionage actors you could say, and placing them in key or strategic positions in organizations and government entities so as to disrupt their critical infrastructure. So a good example would be Russia placing one of its agents in United States government offices so they can work as an espionage actor. So how does cyber warfare differ from the standard warfare where they use weapons? So nation states use hackers instead of soldiers, and instead of guns and bombs they use malicious code. And to move on, we will be talking about 4 different attacks, and each attack contains about 2 to 3 incidents that took place in the respective states. So mainly our focus is between US and Russia, so attacks that originate from Russia and attacks that originate in the US, and the incidents that caused them is examined here. So the key points or the key attacks that we are going to be talking about in this presentation is number 1, the Russian interference in the 2016 United States elections, where Donald Trump was elected as the president, and Russian attacks on United States power grids, and United States attacks on Russian power grids, and Edward Snowden's leak in highly classified information from the NSA. Okay. So our first incident that we'll take a look is about Edward Snowden and his leaks of classified information from the NSA while he was working at the NSA. So who is Edward Snowden? So Snowden was an American who currently is residing in Russia, and he became known for the reason of disclosing highly classified information while he was working at the NSA. So he had access to classified information that many people does not have, and what he did was he publicized a part of it. And after he did put his those documents public, he fled to Hong Kong. After that, he stayed in different other countries, and currently now he is in Russia. So this happened in the June of 2013, and what his revelations or the disclosures revealed was about the mass surveillance that was done by United States government on the residents of the same country. So the United States government was surveilling their own citizens. Now, part of what Edward Snowden does, part of what Edward Snowden did, and the subsequent reaction by the other countries suggests that there might have been some sort of an invisible hand guiding Snowden to release these things, and he did say that the files that he released were in the public interest, but we can't always be sure that, well, even if he says that the released information is public, he might still have information regarding damaging information about the United States surveillance and their security systems. So the damage done by Edward Snowden is clearly depicted here, and you can see that the increase in the budget for US intelligence services and their funding has increased. So the Central Intelligence Agency, their budget increased to from about 14.7 billion, and the National Security Agency 10.8 billion, and the National Reconnaissance Office 10.3 billion. So their budgets actually increased, and the spending categories, you can see that it mainly goes to data collection, 25.3, again surveillance, and then data processing and exploitation, 6.1 billion, and analysis and management and finance facilities come the last. So the aftermath of Edward Snowden was the increase in these categories of data collections and surveillance. Even though what he did was damaging, all he did was mainly increase the departmental spending on surveillance and intelligence activities. So to quote Snowden, I carefully evaluated every single document I disclosed to ensure that each was legitimately in the public interest. There are all sorts of documents that would have made a big impact that I didn't turn over. So he makes a reference to the stuff that he took from the NSA being in the public interest, but as I said before, there even might have been information about ongoing operations in other states that the United States government would have not seen in the public. So our second incident is the Russian interference in the United States elections in 2016. So there are main incidents. So the first one is the incident where St. Petersburg Internet Research Agency based on St. Petersburg creating a number of social media accounts and using them to harm the campaign of Hillary Clinton. So the two main actors in the 2016 election in the United States was Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Clinton at the start had a good stand-in with the citizens of the United Donald Trump, but as you will see from the upcoming slides, the actions that mainly caused Hillary Clinton to lose the election was communications between her campaign and Russia, and some of these actions were part of what the agency in St. Petersburg did. So they harmed her campaign, and in turn it was boosting Donald Trump. And they were acting as legitimate radical political groups. Now this happened in September 2016. So the second incident is Russian military agencies sending spear phishing emails to more than 300 volunteer employees and individuals of the Clinton presidential campaign. So using spear phishing, they send target emails to these employees, and thinking that these are legitimate emails, they click on them and get compromised. This happened in the March of 2016. And one of the best incidents is John Podesta, who was the chairman of Clinton's presidential campaign. He received a phishing email, and he was compromised. So the hackers were able to access more than 60,000 emails in his account. And the third attack is the Russians' attack on United States power grids. So the incident is the US power grid has been always subject of attempted attacks. In 2016, a state-sponsored Russian group tried to hack the American utilities via a compromised email account of a contractor. Now this was reported by the Wall Street Journal. So how these hackers get to these individuals is through low-level contacts, right? They try to hack a low-level employee, and using them they pivot to high-level targets. So this is what this slide says. So instead of attacking the high-value target directly, they get inside using a low-value target, a less protected partner, a member, a simple worker. And they use simple tactics like phishing, and they use establish trusted relationship between the pivot person and then the final target. So once they get that foothold, they work their way up into accessing more critical infrastructure. They target low sensitivity firms that has no reason to adopt DoD grade security and exploit them. And they are in contact with the Department of Defense and the system. So using that connection, they can pivot into the Department of Defense or maybe even a higher security agency's computer infrastructure. So what are the outcomes? Cyber warfare doesn't generally cause massive doesn't cost human lives in when compared to the standard warfare that we see. So people can actually die, but when compared to the Iran-Iraq war and US occupation of Afghanistan, stuff like that, it's relatively low. One of the most probable outcome of cyber warfare and cyber espionage is that hackers been able to manipulate or compromise the United States power grid, and that they could even cause a long-term power outages using that, and maybe do what the Stuxnet did. That was the malware that took part of a nuclear power plant, and they were able to temperature controls. So a large-scale outage in the US power grid can cause devastating impacts. For example, for emergency services, hospitals, even power plants, water treatment, and many other essential services can get disrupted. And on top of that, there's the public factor that has to be considered. When these essential services are cut off, the public essentially starts to panic, and that's very it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen when public chaos happens. So our last incident or attack is the United States attacks on Russian power grids. It's vice versa. So New York Times in their magazine talks about implants or compromises in the Russian power grid. So they're talking about placement of malware in networks involved in managing the Russian power grid, which could be activated remotely anytime if they want to, maybe in a case of major conflict. So how to mitigate cyber warfare? The main thing to consider, the main point to consider when talking about mitigations in cyber warfare is the understanding between nations. So if nations were friendly with each other and share threat intelligence and resources and cyber resources, there won't be a need to attack each other. So out of there's a list that you can see here in the board. So identify threats. It's very basic. So you identify threats, in this case rogue nations. Beware of cybercrime. So how can cybercrimes happen, and what can cause cybercrimes to happen? And one important thing is to keep an eye out for employees, right? That's how usually hackers or threat actors get access to inside systems. They come through the human factor, the employees of a company, and use multi-factor authentication, right? Okay, so let's say it's an email account and it doesn't have multi-factor authentication. So for some reason, the hacker was able to get the password. Maybe they used SPF phishing attack and that succeeded, and they of the account. Now, if multi-factor had been used, the hacker would not have gotten access to the account, because there's another step in the authentication process that has to be verified. It's not the password, but it's the combination of a password and some other different method of authentication. So it's very good to have multi-factor authentication implemented, and conduct timely audits on a regular basis. So audits can be used to ensure that ensure that the infrastructure of companies is compliant and stays secure. protect important data. So that is data classification, and the Department of Defense has a data classification hierarchy, and maybe other corporations that handle important data can implement that to their data handling and transmission process. Carry out risks. This is important because identifying risk is the endpoint of carrying out risk assessments. So have in-depth knowledge about risk factors. So knowledge about your company, knowledge about how data comes to the company, and knowledge about how employees interact with external parties. Things like that are risk factors. Now, having an in-depth knowledge about those things can really help in the long run into securing the corporation or government entities from cyberwarfare, from acts of cyberwarfare. Prepare for the worst scenario. Obviously, a government or a corporation should be prepared to handle the worst possible scenario and be able to readily counter that. And the point that isn't in this slide is education. So employees of companies should be educated on how these how they can get compromised, maybe phishing, maybe they pick up a USB drive on the way to work. So education about cybersecurity, education about education about how these hackers actually get into systems, that is really important. So it is very important to educate the employees of the company and people that they interact with about the importance of cybersecurity in the realm of cyber warfare. So this will be the end of the presentation. Thank you.